I would also say that when we talk about housing first, we're not talking about housing only. We're talking about housing with supportive services. So that means that somebody is meeting regularly with a case manager or a healthcare provider or an employment specialist, somebody that is, checking in to address those issues that led to their homelessness, that were exacerbated by their homelessness. And in some instances, that means providing substance use treatment options. It's just that we don't make that a prerequisite to someone
Why?
being able to
Why not?
deserve housing.
It's not about deserving the housing. It's literally saving the person.
And that is what we are in the business to do, which is why we offer all of those services for individuals. We just don't mandate that because we believe that humans can make their own decisions about their lives. And in some instances, we do help people get more intensive treatment if they're ready to do that, if they have a substance use disorder. But we're not going to require that of you before we will give you the same access to human rights that everybody else has.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Lonely Podcast. This is another episode discussing homelessness in America, and this time I'm speaking with Cathy Alderman, who is the Chief Communication and Public Policy Officer at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Now, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is probably the largest nonprofit organization that operates in the state of Colorado and assists with the homelessness crisis. As you will notice, Cathy and I strongly disagree on many issues, in particular the reasons for homelessness and the efficiency of housing first policy. However, I would truly like to take this opportunity and thank Cathy for agreeing to come and speak with me. I was upfront about our disagreement from our initial engagement, and she still agreed to come and talk to me and have this debate. I truly, truly appreciate that. If I'm being honest, this was probably my favorite episode thus far, simply because I believe it's much more rewarding to actually have a conversation with someone I disagree with and have a respectful debate on our disagreement, which I believe this is what Cathy and I were able to do, but you will judge this for yourself. I also would like to apologize. There were some technical issues throughout the conversation, and I would do anything I can to avoid those in the future. So without further ado, please welcome Cathy Alderman. Maybe we can start by you can just present yourself a little bit and the organization you work for. It will be great.
My name is Cathy Alderman. I'm the Chief Communications and Public Policy Officer for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is a housing and healthcare provider, providing about 21 units of affordable and supportive housing throughout the Denver metro area, and some transitional housing options in southeastern Colorado. And we're also a federally qualified health center or a community health center providing fully integrated primary care, behavioral health, vision care, dental care, substance use treatment. And we do that both at clinic settings as well as through a street medicine team. Then I oversee our advocacy department, which is responsible for our public education efforts, our lobbying efforts, our media relations, and all of our kind of public-facing reports and information.
Okay, that's a very thorough explanation. Thank you very much. How did you end up working for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless?
I've been with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless for almost 8 years. Prior to working for CCH, I did similar work for Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. I've always been in the social justice and healthcare access fields, making sure, especially that marginalized populations have access to the healthcare that they need in order to be successful and to be able to thrive. Housing policy was new to me coming to the coalition, but it's something that I've really enjoyed learning about. I learned something new every single day. And, we know that homelessness is absolutely a housing issue. And so getting, really mired in housing policy has been a pretty natural fit.
Okay, and maybe you touched about it before, but kind of elaborate more about the objectives of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless.
Sure. So the coalition believes in lasting solutions to homelessness. And so that means that we are a housing and healthcare provider really looking to help people stabilize when they're exiting the cycle of homelessness and trying to help people stabilize who might be at risk of becoming homeless because of an eviction, their inability to pay rent, or any other issues that might lead to housing instability. We also believe that access to healthcare is a human right, and that housing is healthcare. And we think that these things are so intricately linked that you really should ensure that someone is stably housed and has the access to the healthcare they need to be successful in life and to thrive. And we do both our housing services and our healthcare services in a variety of ways. We find people that are experiencing homelessness and we help them get into housing and access the healthcare they need. And then we also work with our residents to keep them stably housed and using the healthcare services that we have to offer.
Okay, understood. And how about the way I see it, I would like to kind of structure it in kind of three different ways. First of all, asking of what is the issue at hand? Like, how do we measure the current situation? And the second one is why? Like, what are the reasons for this thing to, what are the reasons that are the foster this crisis. And the last one is, and this would be kind of the main point of discussion here. And lastly, kind of talk about the solutions. How would you suggest to we solve or go about this issue? So how about we start by identifying the problem, and it would be helpful if you can help define homelessness.
Sure. Well, in the state of Colorado, we know that between 10 and 55,000 people are experiencing homelessness. And we also know that there are many more households, likely 75,000 plus, that are living with housing instability. And both of these things are just largely attributable to a very high cost housing market. So as housing costs increase, we see increases in homelessness because people can't afford housing. As we also see very few resources being devoted to building deeply affordable housing and making that housing available to people that are on very low incomes or fixed incomes or exiting the cycle of homelessness. And so we have a cost issue, a supply issue, and then we are seeing more and more people choosing to sleep outside because our shelter facilities aren't appropriate for them. We don't have enough shelter space for everybody experiencing homelessness in the state of Colorado or in the Denver metro area. Um, and a lot of people don't want to use shelter because it's crowded, because they can't take all their belongings in, because they can't go in with a partner or a pet. And so we're seeing more people sleeping outside on our streets and our parks and in our alleys, which is, both increasing the visibility of homelessness, but also the dangers of homelessness to those individuals.
Okay, and do you have a threshold in terms of because you said there are 10 to 15,000 folks who experience homelessness in the state of Colorado, and you say that some of them are facing eviction and stuff like that. So can you, I'm trying to get to the actual definition in terms of like, is that a family that is making below a certain income, or is it, if you have like a very like pinpointed definition, and also kind of differentiate that from the folks that we just encounter on the street, because I think these are two different elements here that we need to define.
Sure. So people experiencing homelessness can be experiencing homelessness in different locations. So we know that there are a lot of people that are experiencing homelessness that are living in shelters. Many of them have been living in shelters sometimes for years, waiting for the appropriate housing resource to become available to them. We also know that there is an unsheltered population of people experiencing homelessness, and those are the folks that are out on the street because shelter doesn't work for them. And then we have a population of people experiencing homelessness that we don't even know about, because those individuals are sleeping in their cars, they're staying in motels, they're doubled up with other family members, and they simply just don't get counted. That's oftentimes how we see family homelessness, because many families don't want to separate when they enter the cycle of homelessness. And so they'll double up with other family members and not seek out services because they don't want to be subject to potential custody rules or family separation because of them entering the cycle of homelessness. And then there's another population of people that are at severe risk of becoming homeless because of the high cost housing market. And those individuals are generally living on middle to low incomes. And while their economic mobility might be growing in some way, so their wages might be increasing a little bit, they're not increasing to the level of housing costs. And so their wages can't simply keep up with housing costs. And so every month they're making very difficult decisions about how to spend their resources, whether to pay for rent or pay for food or pay for medical expenses or childcare or transportation. And these households are cost burdened. So they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. They're extremely cost burdened when they're spending 50% of their income on housing costs. And we know that just one tragic event in someone's life can really push them over the edge and mean that they can't afford to pay for that high cost housing, and then they enter the cycle of homelessness. Once someone enters the cycle of homelessness, it's much more difficult to get out of it than it is to try to keep somebody in housing. And so we look at how to address homelessness in two ways. One is we need to resolve it for all of the people that are experiencing it today, sleeping outside, staying in shelters. But we also need to prevent the flow into homelessness by keeping people stably housed.
Okay. Okay, I guess, so basically, do you define homelessness as, a homeless individual as someone who does not have a fixed address to their name? Would that be a fair definition?
Yes, I would say that somebody experiencing homelessness is not likely to have, a fixed address, their own lease agreement. They may sometimes, in some instances, use other addresses, like the address of a shelter, to receive mail. But yes, it's somebody, and the federal definition is generally somebody who's staying in a place that's not fit for long-term human habitation.
Okay, understood. And okay, so I guess next one, so from what you observe and working in your organization, is it fair to say that there is a homelessness crisis? And if so, how do we actually determine that? Like based on what metrics?
Sure. So yes, I would agree that there is a homelessness crisis. I would also agree that we have a housing crisis and that those things are absolutely linked. The solution to homelessness is housing. And I think, what we've seen is that year over year, at least in the state of Colorado and frankly nationwide, that the numbers of people being reported as experiencing homelessness are increasing. And those numbers are often increasing in areas where the housing market is also becoming cost prohibitive, especially for low income, fixed income, and homeless households. And the cause of this, again, is the high cost of housing and the failure to invest in solutions. So the federal government funding to address homelessness and frankly to provide resources to build affordable housing has largely remained stagnant. And the state of Colorado doesn't make any state investments in homelessness resolution or prevention, and until just recently wasn't spending very much money to build deeply affordable housing. And so you see all of these things converge and kind of create the crisis that we have today. And the reason that homelessness is a crisis is because it is, very dangerous for individuals who are sleeping outside. They're subject to the elements. They're subject to having crime perpetrated against them. They're not getting the health care they need. They're not getting the stability they need to resolve their homelessness. But it's also very expensive to leave people in the cycle of homelessness, force them to use emergency systems instead of regular preventive systems. And so what we've seen over the years is that it costs twice as much to leave somebody in the cycle of homelessness than it does to house them and provide them with supportive services so that they can stay stably housed. So that means that we're not using our taxpayer resources in a way that's very productive for our communities, because we're allowing people to use emergency services like shelter, like emergency rooms, like the criminal legal system, to address their housing needs rather than provide them with housing.
Okay, it would be a good segue to kind of jump into the next, because you said a lot of things that I would like to respond to, but I'm holding on here. I just wanted to jump into the next one. So, in terms of the why, and you mentioned that multiple times, you said it's a housing issue, and I want to touch on that more and ask you, do you think that we have identified the problem correctly?
I absolutely believe that our homelessness crisis is a housing crisis. That's not to say that there aren't other issues related to homelessness that we need to think, comprehensively about. For example, we know that people experiencing homelessness don't have access to regular health care. And when they don't have access to regular health care, they're forced to use the emergency room, which is not the best way to get regular health care. And so we need to provide better pathways to accessing both primary and behavioral health care, because we know those things are very related to each other. Many times somebody who is experiencing homelessness has suffered from a traumatic event in their life that led to the homelessness. And once they are homeless, they experience trauma over and over and over. Well, this takes an enormous toll on someone's physical and mental health. So we need to provide better access to mental health services, behavioral health services, and primary care for folks experiencing homelessness and for folks that are at risk of becoming homeless. I'll also say that we don't make the greatest investments in connecting people to other services that might help them get out of the cycle of homelessness, like employment opportunities or other supportive services that could resolve their cycle of homelessness and put them on a path to stability. But we just don't make enough investments there. And what I'm referring to is what we refer to as supportive services in affordable housing. And right now, there's no direct funding for supportive services. So once somebody might get into housing after a cycle of homelessness, if they don't have those supportive services, those services that help them connect to the community, get the health care they need, get the employment options or the benefit options they're eligible for, then their housing stability can become at risk. So I think we need to look at ways to make better investments in those supportive services so that we can help people move people from streets and shelter into housing and then help them stay stably housed.
Okay, so what are you basing the statement that homelessness is a housing problem? What is it based off in terms of the data? How do you determine that?
So we have a lack of around 125,000 to 200,000 units of affordable housing in the state of Colorado. That data comes from the Division of Housing, which is the state agency. It also comes from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. That gap in affordable housing is felt most intensely for people living at the lowest income and for people on fixed incomes or trying to exit the cycle of homelessness. We know that most people experiencing homelessness are living at the lowest income. And there's just not enough housing to move them from homelessness to housed. There's also not enough housing for those low income households, which means that they are falling into the cycle of homelessness as rents increase and as they are facing more evictions. I did see a report today that evictions in the state of Colorado have increased 32%. So we're seeing more and more people losing their housing, and there's already a gap of housing available to them. And so it's not likely that they're going to be able to get rehoused anytime soon because housing costs are so expensive and we have such a dearth of supply. We know that many people experiencing homelessness, once they are housed, they can stay housed with the appropriate services and resources. And that's obviously a huge benefit to them. It's also a benefit to community, and it's a cost saver for taxpayers.
But you say two different things, right? So you say there is 150 to 200,000 units. Like we don't have, sorry, we are missing 150 to 200,000 units of affordable housing. But my question, I guess, is how do you, because this is fact number one. Fact number two is that you have an increase in homelessness. But how do you make the connection between the two? I know that most of the studies done on homelessness are actually self-reported, in the sense that basically the individuals who are experiencing homelessness, as you said, are reporting for why they ended up on the streets or why they don't have a house. So my question to you is, how do you make the connection between lack of affordable housing and homelessness?
Well, the solution to homelessness is to get somebody housed. The very definition of being homeless is somebody without housing. And so
Yeah,
if they're,
but I understand that, but I'm saying, it's to say it, it's good, but my question is, how do you determine that?
well, I was just explaining about how we have a dearth of affordable housing. So we don't have the housing resources to move people from the cycle of homelessness into housing that they can afford. We also know that a lot of households are falling into the cycle of homelessness because the housing costs are going up. And all of that has been very well documented. But we also talk to people on the streets, and they say, the reason I am in the cycle of homelessness is because I lost my home. And I haven't been able to find another home that I can afford to live in.
Is there a follow-up question to that? How did you lose your home?
In some instances, yes, but also I think for some people it doesn't matter how they lost their home.
Because,
The notion is that they would like to find housing that they can afford and live in. But
sure.
we do know that a lot of people that we encounter on the streets have lost their home because of evictions, or they've lost their home because they lost a job or they lost a family member and they could no longer afford the rent, especially as rent was increasing.
Yeah, again, so this is, it's interesting because, okay, so I lived in different countries before coming to the United States. And from my experience, income mobility in the United States is by far the best I have ever seen anywhere else in the world. So looking into, like, seeing that, I'm saying, what is the reason for example, if someone lose their house or for whatever reason, um, and understanding that people want to stay where they live, but there are other places in the United States that are cheaper than the state of Colorado. Is that fair?
Yes, I think housing markets vary from state to state.
Right. So the question is, to me, like, for example, if I can't afford an apartment, I'm thinking about from that perspective. If I can afford a place in Denver, then I would go to a farther location in the suburbs. Yeah, it would be more difficult for me to commute, but at least I would have a roof over my head. And if that is too expensive, why won't I move to a state? I lived in California. It's way more expensive. Like, to find a one bedroom in the Bay Area is a joke. It's over 3K a month. So, but even then, in California, you can go to more rural areas and you find like cheaper rent. So I guess my question is, like, how do you explain that this is not happening? Or maybe it is happening, but it is still visibly for people who just see the situation, you don't see that happening, at least sufficiently. Or yeah.
I think there are a number of reasons why somebody who may lose their housing would choose not to move somewhere else. One, moving can also be cost prohibitive. Taking your belongings with you, trying to find, connections and employment in a new location is not going to always just happen easily or without cost. I think that people also, they know their community that they're in. They have family connections, they have social connections. They may have, employment or educational opportunities in that area. And so moving just doesn't make sense. But I think what happens oftentimes when individuals do lose their housing They don't have a lot of resources to then get into another housing option or to move to a less expensive place. And so I'm not sure that the answer to homelessness is we'll go find a cheaper place to live. I think that the answer is we need to build more housing that's available for people living at the lowest income and available to people living on fixed incomes, and to help people move out of the cycle of homelessness. We don't just house people in Denver when we find them experiencing homelessness in the city of Denver. We often look for housing in other areas outside of the Denver metro area that they can afford. So it is part of a system, but it's also not, it's not as simple as saying to somebody who's lost their home, well, just go to another city or go to another state. They likely don't have the resources to do that.
But wouldn't it be, so you say so in trying to build affordable housing, that's a resource, right? That's a lot of money that is being spent on that.
So
I would argue there's not enough money being spent
Okay.
on building the kind of affordable housing that we need for households on low incomes, fixed incomes, and for people exiting the cycle of homelessness. We have housing in Colorado that is available and vacant, but it's the rents are too high for people who don't make enough money to afford $3,000 a month.
Okay. So it's interesting, like you said, that if someone loses their house, it doesn't matter what is the reason, right? They say, I lost my house, but there's not necessarily a follow-up question on that, right?
I'm sure that in many instances we speak to individuals about, what caused them to lose their housing so that we can help them be successful if we're able to help them identify their next housing opportunity. In some instances, those things are absolutely out of individuals' control. There was a woman, that was recently featured in a local news story whose house burned down several years ago, and she lost everything. And she hasn't been able to find housing since then. So I think it doesn't matter that somebody lost their house to a fire or because of an eviction because they couldn't afford to pay rent. We still need a system and a safety net and opportunities for people to get rehoused in all of those situations.
I agree, but if you don't know the reason why, like you just mentioned two reasons that are, tragic, and I would argue are probably the exception, maybe not the rule. And I guess if we don't know the reason why, so there, okay, so in legal settings, to determine if someone, for example, in negligent cases, right, in tort cases, you need to have two causes that you need to determine have occurred, right? So you have the but-for cause and the proximate cause. And the classic example there, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to explain or something, I'm just like trying to make a point here. So if you don't determine the but-for cause, which is the underlying cause of something bad happening to another person, then you cannot, then if you only look into the proximate cause, okay, then it's not necessarily, you can't understand exactly what happened there. So a classic example of that is, again, going into the tort cases, a bus driver drops a woman in a location that is not her original bus stop, and she needs to walk in a high crime neighborhood, and she gets robbed and she gets hurt. And then the question is whether the bus driver is negligent for doing so. So why did the woman got injured? Proximate cause is because she got robbed and got hit. But there is an underlying cause, the but-for cause. But for the driver dropping her off in her designated station, none of that would have happened, right? So that's, to me, like, if we don't understand why people lose their houses, how can we help them?
Well, I would say that, I think what I am saying is that people are losing their homes for a variety of reasons. And we do want to address the reasons that they left, but there's nothing I can do about preventing fire.
Sure, but the example, how many people lose their houses to fire?
I have no idea.
Okay. So do you have like a database that determines how many people lost their, what is the reasons why folks lost their houses or could not afford the house anymore?
I think that when we're working with people who are experiencing homelessness and they have told us that they lost their home, we absolutely work with them to identify what resources they have to potentially get into another housing option. If they choose to tell us that they lost their housing because they lost their job, in many instances, like during COVID especially, that happened. We saw a lot of people lose their jobs, so they couldn't afford their rent, and they were evicted. And so we work with individuals to help them.
Wasn't an eviction moratorium
There was an eviction moratorium, and it ran out.
but didn't it run out very recently?
It's been at least 6 months now, so we're certainly seeing that rental assistance support and the eviction moratorium are no longer there to protect people from being evicted for non-payment of rent, and rent is going up. So we know in many instances, rent is increasing at levels that are around 20% annually. Well, wages can't keep up with that level. Wages are increasing around 6%. And so housing is just becoming more unattainable for folks that, might be employed. If somebody loses their job and loses their home, we will work with them on both trying to find housing they can afford and connecting them back to employment services. So we are addressing the underlying cause, but it's much easier to address that underlying cause once somebody is again stably housed, so that they have a place to rest, they have a place to shower, they have a place to eat, which is going to make them a more employable and an effective employee.
Okay. Let's talk about housing first policy. Can you explain the, I think you touched on that, but can you explain the rationale behind that?
Sure. So housing first is the idea that you meet somebody kind of where they are in their life and you help them to find stable housing, because we know that housing is the foundation on which all other aspects of our life depend. And you don't do that with preconditions. So you don't tell somebody that they must be employed in order to deserve housing. You don't tell somebody that they must not be using substances in order to deserve housing, because you can use their stable housing status once they are housed to help them address those issues. So many people, once they're stably housed, are able to get employed again, able to reconnect with family and community, able to address healthcare conditions or mental health conditions that are virtually impossible to address while you're sleeping outside on the streets. And we even know that that's true for substance use disorders. When people have substance use disorders, if you help them obtain stable housing, it's much more likely that they will, start receiving counseling and treatment services for that substance use disorder than it is if they're left outside to languish in the cycle of homelessness and having a substance use disorder.
So can you again back it up with data on that issue, and like how many people who move from the streets and into housing got a job within a certain amount of time? How many of them who have suffered substance abuse disorder are no longer suffering that from that disorder after they were housed? Do you have any of that data?
I don't have any specific numbers to give you. It's very individualized and can vary from program to program. But I can say that we did a pilot program in Denver called the Denver Social Impact Bond, where we housed 250 chronically homeless individuals. And through that housing, they one, it cost half as much to house them and provide them with supportive services than it was costing to let them languish through these emergency systems. And we saw that many more people started seeking out preventative and regular health care. So the The number of doctor appointments that people started going to increased, which is good because we want people to be going to the doctor on a regular basis to address ongoing healthcare needs rather than using the emergency room to address the need once it's gotten so bad that it's become an emergency. We know that many more people engaged in substance use counseling and treatment with us once they were stably housed than they would have had they been left to sleep outside. So happy to share some of those numbers and that report with you, because I think it absolutely backs up the idea that stable housing is the thing that gives you the opportunity to address issues that may or may not have led to your homelessness, but that were likely exacerbated by your experience in homelessness. And once somebody is stably housed, they're much more able to be able to address those issues. It's very, very difficult to address mental health issues while living, outside or in shelters, because it's traumatic, it's chaotic, which exacerbates the issues related to mental health. It's hard to address, ongoing healthcare conditions like diabetes, respiratory illnesses, or heart conditions, because those require medications. And if you're sleeping in an environment where you're moving around a lot, it's not likely that you're going to be able to maintain access to those medications. We know that people with substance use disorders tend to use substances for a variety of reasons when they're sleeping outside. In some instances, it is to self-medicate. In some instances, it's to, stay awake and protect their belongings. In some instances, it's because it's available to them. But there are no substance use treatment options when you're sleeping outside. Those options become much more available once you're stably housed.
Okay, so you have 250 folks. How long was the study for?
It was a 5-year study.
And how many of them are still in housing today?
I think the first year we had housing stability rates of around 88%. And after 3 years, that dropped down to like 83%, because we did see some people exit housing or move away. And unfortunately, we did have some clients that passed away during the time of the study.
How many passed away?
I actually don't know how many passed away, but yeah, I'm not positive that we have those specific numbers. But again, I can send you that report, and if it's available, it'd be in there.
Yeah, so I did want to ask you a little bit about some of the other reports that I looked into. So, for example, in terms of housing, okay, just some data that I looked into. I believe in 2018, there was a study done in San Francisco. They housed approximately 200 individuals. Again, chronically homeless individuals who were housed. And within 2 years, within 2 years, 20% of them actually died. There's another study from Harvard Medical that took place from 2005 to 2019. And that study showed that though 80% of the people maintained house after a year, that number fell to 36% after 5 years, and literally half of the cohorts died during the study. And there's another study that from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., that basically provides very similar facts and very similar data. Talks about approximately 10% of the people dying within a year of being housed. So it kind of goes back to my previous question, which is understanding the but-for cause. Because when we understand that, we can actually help and treat. So in some of my conversations, my recent conversation with Tom Wolfe and Paul Scudo, these are folks that actually experienced that homelessness and were addicted to drugs and alcohol. And they, from their perspective, they see housing first policy and just putting people in housing without providing them with the actual required care. It just leads to their demise, a premature demise. So I guess maybe you can comment on that.
Sure. Well, I would say housing is absolutely not the cause of people dying once they come inside.
So what is the cause
of homelessness? I think in those instances that you're talking about, there may be some overdose deaths in those number. We also have learned over the years that people who have experienced homelessness, especially over a long period of time, have chronic health conditions that have gone unaddressed. And when those health conditions go unaddressed on the streets, people are constantly in, fight or flight mode, survival mode, right? So a lot of adrenaline in their body that's actually protecting them from succumbing to those diseases. When you bring somebody inside and they stabilize and they start, trying to address those issues, it can catch up to them. That's not to say that we would ever advocate that you should leave somebody out on the streets to suffer because their heart condition might kill them once they're no longer suffering in the same way. We would say that everyone deserves stable housing, and if that stable housing isn't going to lead to your death, that stable housing is going to make the last moments of your life more dignified and respectable.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but on that point, I actually heard that point multiple times, and it's troubling for me to hear that, because I'm not saying that putting someone in a house, it's the housing that kills them. No, it's not the housing themselves. Itself. It's focusing on housing without focusing on the underlying issue. If you put someone who is suffering from addiction in a house, and now instead of living on the streets, they live alone, now if they OD, no one is out there to actually help them or to call the police or to call anyone. So, and that is, again, in study after study, was shown that actually the survival rate of overdose is higher among people who actually live on the streets. And I'm not advocating for people to stay on the streets, of course not. But I'm just saying that I don't accept the notion that someone died in a dignified way when they were housed. I think it's a failure of our society to put someone in a house and having them die within a year. We are probably doing something wrong here. Like, I just don't see how else we can see it.
So I would also say that when we talk about housing first, we're not talking about housing only. We're talking about housing with supportive services. So that means that somebody is meeting regularly with a case manager or a healthcare provider or an employment specialist, somebody that is, checking in to address those issues that led to their homelessness, that were exacerbated by their homelessness. And in some instances, that means providing substance use treatment options. It's just that we don't make that a prerequisite to someone being able to deserve housing.
It's not about deserving the housing. It's literally saving the person.
And that is what we are in the business to do, which is why we offer all of those services for individuals. We just don't mandate that, because we believe that humans can make their own decisions about their lives. And in some instances, we do help people get more intensive treatment if they're ready to do that, if they have a substance use disorder. But we're not going to require that of you before we will give you the same access to human rights that everybody else has.
Yeah, but the issue here is that, so when you talk to people who actually experienced it and now live a normal life, and I would state that someone who's living on the street does not live a normal life. Like, not a life that anyone I know would aspire to. Zero. So the people who actually live a normal life and were able to rehabilitate their life all say that, and I'm not, again, this is not me advocating for that, but this is what they are saying. They're saying that they were able to get clean only once they were arrested, sent to jail, and that's the only time when an external force came in and told them, hey, you have no choice, you have to do that. And when given the choice, Tom Wolfe says, I was losing my house and my wife and my kids. And my wife came to me and told me, here is a bag with your belongings. You need to go to rehab. And he said, at the moment I was in withdrawal and there's just no way I'm going to do it. So when given the option to people who suffer from addiction, the likelihood of them voluntarily taking themselves and saying, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm not saying it's not happening. It is happening. But the likelihood of that is very small. It's low. So that's to me, that again, it goes back to the underlying issue, underlying cause. And before that, you mentioned that we don't need to ask what is the cause of your homelessness. Now we're saying that we do need to look into that. But my question is, do we know how many people who actually are homeless suffer from substance abuse disorder or mental illnesses and stuff like that? Do we know that?
I think it varies, right? So as we talked about just a little while ago, there are people experiencing homelessness that are living in shelters and, have been waiting for housing resources, for years. And they're in a relatively stable environment because they're in shelter and they're receiving, regular meals and they're getting some services, but they just can't get, out of the shelter system and into housing. And I think that, rates of, substance use, misuse, and mental health issues might be to a lesser degree than for folks that are sleeping outside and, subject to the elements. I also think we see more substance use among people that are sleeping outside because they're not using substances behind closed doors. So, we know that there are 46 million people in the United States that have a substance use disorder. There's only 500,000 people experiencing homelessness. So I don't think that there is a correlation to say that the people experiencing homelessness are the only people that have substance use disorders. The reason that other people are able to address those issues is because they're stably housed and getting those supportive services that get them on a pathway. That's not to say that in some instances, individuals might need mandated treatment. It's just not the model that we use in order to house somebody, because what we've learned over the 40 years that we've done this is that people are much more likely to address their substance use disorders, address their mental health issues, address their healthcare issues once they're stably housed. And you're talking about hearing from so many people that have said, I wouldn't have done this on my own, but you're telling me that it's a one individual. And what I would say to that is everybody's experience is different. And
Sure.
So a treatment first model that assumes everybody experiencing homelessness has a substance use disorder or a mental health issue is just not the right approach, in our opinion. In our opinion, we house people, we help them to stabilize, and then we, again, provide those services so they can address those issues. So it's not as if this means it's either housing first or treatment first. It's just that treatment first is only applicable for people that actually have substance use disorders and might not be willing to engage with services, which is a much smaller population of the people than those that we're dealing with through the housing first model.
Okay, so I would say a few things to that. First, I agree with you that not every person who is suffering from homelessness is necessarily suffering from addiction. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that housing people is necessarily bad. No, I think it's a good thing. I would love it. And I think every individual or most people would agree that it is a net good to put people in a safe environment where, again, they are not exposed to the elements and they don't, because, just reading the report that you provide, you see how many folks actually, die from violence and other like blunt forces, that they can step on something or they can get hit with something. And of course I have concerns about that, and no one wants anyone to die like that. It's tragic. It's terrible. What I am saying is that if we don't know how many people that we are treating or we are providing housing with are actually suffering from addiction. And again, I'm talking to you and I'm asking the question of how many of those folks are actually suffering from that. I'm not sure I get a clear answer on that. So I'm saying if we don't know that, then how can we really help them? Because again, the data shows that if we simply put them in a house, and I understand that providing people with care is a great thing to do and it's important, but something here is probably not working right, because the people who experience homeless, they die in an alarming rate, and they also die in an alarming rate when they are sheltered. Whether it's even according to the report that you published, that your organization published in 2022, right? So there are 263 homeless who died last year. And of those, like more than 50% was due to overdose. And of that, I kind of ran the calculation. It's kind of hard to discern from the chart there because there's not much percentage. But from what I seen like, okay, you have 18% approximately died in a hotel or motel, 16% in residence, approximately 8% in supervised facilities, and 6% in shelters. So that amounts to 48%. So that's half of the people who died actually sheltered. They actually died it's not a house, but it's an environment that protects them from the stuff that we mentioned before. So, and still the conclusion of the report was, and I can quote it, year after year, mortality data continue to identify housing as one of the most prominent protective factors against unnatural death among people experiencing homelessness. And my question again is, how can we determine that? On the basis of what?
I mean, we house, hundreds of people every single year. And we see remarkable success with many individuals that we house who engage and, all of the services that I've been talking about, who do get help for their physical health issue or their mental health issue, their substance use disorder. And we believe in that model. We believe that housing is the foundation. And a lack of housing means that any of those issues that go unaddressed are going to be worse for you in the long run. And that's why we see, unfortunately, so much death out on the streets among people experiencing homelessness. I would also say, in regards to substance use disorders, like we don't have enough resources and, voluntary or involuntary treatment options for folks to access. As I was saying before, it's much easier for someone to address their substance use disorder when they're stably housed, because we're not taking substance use treatment out to the streets in a way that we need to or that we could. And to me, that's a failure of the system of substance use treatment. But if those individuals were all stably housed, it is much more likely that they would be able to address those issues, which are very, very difficult to address when you're in that chaotic and traumatic cycle.
So why not put it, okay, not as a prerequisite, but as a condition upon maintaining housing? Put it as a condition. You have to start treatment day one. Why not do that?
That's not the model that we believe in. We believe that people are much more successful with recovery when they choose to engage in recovery services.
Even if they die, even if they have 20% chance of dying.
So we operate a facility in southeastern Colorado. It's the Fort Lyon Residential Recovery Facility. It's for individuals experiencing homelessness who have substance use disorders and are ready to enter into recovery services. And we found in the early years that people that were court mandated to come down to Fort Lyon were not successful. They weren't ready for recovery. They weren't ready to engage. And so they oftentimes relapsed and left the program. when people are ready to address their substance use disorders, it is much more likely that they're going to be on a more stable path to recovery. That's not to say they don't relapse sometimes, and it's not to say that they don't falter, because we know that substance use disorders are very complicated, and there is no single path to recovering. But we find much better success with individuals who make the choice to engage in those services.
Okay, well, I think we have exhausted this topic and we can move on. It's okay. We can agree to disagree on this one, but that's fine. I want to say that I really respected the fact that you come and talk about it, openly here. I don't take it for granted. So thank you again. Let's move on. And another thing I wanted to ask you about is financial incentives. Denver moved from spending approximately like $8 million a year more than a decade ago to spending, I think the latest budget is approximately $236 million. However, the homeless population in Denver has increased significantly throughout the year. So I guess my question for you is do you think we put the financial incentives in the right place here?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean. I will say that Denver had, prior to about 5 or 6 years ago, was not investing very much money in both homelessness resolution and building more affordable housing. Now the city of Denver is, but during that time, the number of people falling into the cycle of homelessness continued to increase, and yet there were no resources to resolve homelessness, prevent homelessness, and move people into housing. And that 240, I think it's 249, I can't remember exactly. A lot of that is one-time federal funds. So because of the American Rescue Plan Act, a lot of cities and states chose to use some of those dollars for housing and homelessness. And the city of Denver did direct a pretty big percentage of its American Rescue Plan Act funds for homelessness prevention, so that emergency rental assistance, for homelessness resolution, so to move people from streets to housing, and to building more housing. But housing takes much longer to build than it does to address the immediate needs on the street. And so that's one reason why we're not moving as many people into housing as we'd like, because there's just not enough housing resources or available affordable housing to move people into.
Do you mind touching on like basically how many people do you help a year, and kind of how do you measure success in terms of your metrics?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're a housing and healthcare provider, so we're providing services in a variety of ways. We own and operate 21 developments of affordable and supportive housing, and those are for families and individuals. So on any given night, we're housing up to 2,100 households. Some of those households are individuals that exited the cycle of homelessness. Some of those households are just in need of deeply affordable housing. Some of those households are cost burden households that we are able to keep the rent lower so that they aren't able to pay their rent. And then we also administer state and city housing vouchers. And that means that we help people find housing in locations that we don't own. And that's an additional 2,200. So on any given night, we're helping to house about 4,500 households. And then on the healthcare side, we provide healthcare through our clinic locations, through a street medicine team, through telehealth. And I believe last year we provided healthcare services to over 16,000 individuals. Now, those people are sometimes people experiencing homelessness. They're also sometimes the people that are living in our housing or that are very low income and need access to healthcare because they don't otherwise have health insurance or the means to pay for private healthcare.
Okay, so here's the way I look at this, and looking into the last 10 years in Denver and in other major cities in the States, it seems like the total amount invested in this in assisting or solving this issue, I don't know if we can say solving, but whatever, has increased significantly, in many cities. However, the homelessness population has increased as well. So it's like it I don't know what it is, but whatever it is that's being done, I don't know how effective it is, because if you look at the models, like simply if you try and look at it from a business standpoint, like, right, you put more money, you get not great, like the results that you're getting just cannot catch on with the problem. So do you care commenting on that?
I think that that is absolutely true. That if you don't invest in solving a problem when the problem begins, then you're going to always be behind being able to catch up to the problem as it exacerbates. And that's what we're seeing in the city of Denver and in the state of Colorado, is that the city and state did not make investments when the crisis really began, and so is now trying to play catch up. And it's very hard to play catch up in a space where you have to build the solution, because the building of the solution can take up to 2 or 3 years, and you can only do that 100 units at a time. Meanwhile, people are falling into the cycle of homelessness at much greater rates than we're able to move people out of it. And so we would argue that, frankly, we should be doubling down on these investments, getting more housing resources into the system to address the number of people experiencing homelessness today, but also the fact that people are going to fall into the cycle of homelessness over the next year. And if we're not planning for that, then we just stay behind the problem. I don't think that, and I don't think that you're saying this, but it kind of sounds like you might be saying that spending more money on resolving homelessness is making homelessness worse. That absolutely is
No,
not true.
I'm saying that what I'm saying is that it appears from the perspective of um, anyone looking at the problem and the amount of investment that went to that problem, it appears that maybe we're barking at the wrong tree. Like maybe we are not aiming our funds into sustainable long-term solutions, and that is because, as I said before, the budget has increased significantly. I know that we are in Denver, but in Los Angeles or in San Francisco, there were billions of dollars because it costs a lot of money to build a house in Los Angeles or in San Francisco. And the same goes to Denver. So my question is, are we effectively using the budget and the funds that were provided? And if so, how much do we need? Like, what would be, if you have an open check, like what would you suggest?
So I think that some of the data has shown over the years that it costs between, maybe on an average about $20,000 to house somebody with supportive services.
Actually, the data on that is, and that's according to the University of Denver, and the University of Colorado Denver says that it's actually between 50 to 100,000 a
That's not
year
accurate.
on.
Not for housing and services. That could
So
be
it says
accurate.
that the city of Denver spend between 50 to 100,000 a year on
So
each
that
homeless
report that
individual.
you're referring to is the Common Sense Institute.
Right.
And I'd be more than happy to share with you our criticisms of that report, because they double
Okay.
counted funding multiple times, actually triple counted funding, and divided it by a single number of people that they thought were experiencing homelessness. And it's not that simple, right? I think back to the conversation we were having earlier. Not every single person has the same pathway out of homelessness into housing.
Yeah.
Some people are going to require more services. Some people are going to have worse health conditions. Some people are going to require less. So you can't really fully quantify it. But what we know is that the cost of affordable housing with supportive services is around $20,000 a year. Give or take, right? So sometimes it's going to be a little bit more, probably around 25,000, and sometimes it's going to be less, around 18,000, because it also depends on what the individual can pay themselves. But the cost of leaving somebody in that cycle to cycle through those emergency systems, including shelter, including the criminal legal system, including detox and the ER, is twice that at least. And in some instances, even more, and in some instances, probably a little bit less. But what I would say is, when you think about how you spend money to address the problem of homelessness, you have to invest in different areas. So, we believe that the long-term lasting solutions investment should be in housing, affordable housing for people that need it most. But we also know that bringing that housing to market takes a long time. You can't invest every dollar in housing and leave people on the streets without shelter, without services, without food. So you have to also use some of those dollars to address the emergency that you have on hand. And that emergency is, the people that are sleeping outside and don't have access to services. So while we argue that we need long-term investments in housing, we recognize that we also have to address the emergency that is in front of us. And it's more costly to address the emergency in front of us, because emergency services are just more costly because they're meant to be emergency services and not long-term solutions. So I think when the city's looking at its budget, it has to say, what are the dollars we have to spend to save lives on the streets, to keep people from being subject to the elements, to try to get them into shelters or alternatives to shelter? And then what are the dollars that we can invest in these longer term solutions so that we can start moving people out of that emergency? And it's a real tension. It's one that we grapple with all the time, because again, we believe in those longer term solutions, but longer term solutions take more time.
I understand. Okay, that's thank you for that explanation. That's great. I wanted to ask you about, because I saw that you mentioned that you also, one of your job criteria is doing lobbying efforts, and I did notice that your organization spent, I would say, I think from 2016 to 2019, something like $4 million, like basically $1 million a year. That's not true?
On lobbying, absolutely not. We're not allowed to spend more than $1 million, and we've never gotten close to it.
Okay. So, okay, got it. Understand. So, what is the lobbying effort that you are advocating for?
Sure. So we lobby at the local, state, and federal level. So we have conversations with elected officials about investing in long-term solutions. So primarily what we're looking for is greater investments in homelessness resolution, trying to save lives on the street, greater investments in housing development, making sure that we're using public resources to build that deeply affordable housing that households on the lowest income and fixed incomes, and for folks trying to exit the cycle of homelessness, can access. We've had some success in those areas. Denver has an affordable housing fund now and a homelessness resolution fund, but those are things that we've only really been able to bring online within the last 6 years or so. We've had some success at the state and securing some housing funds, and then directing some one-time federal funds to homelessness and housing. But we obviously still need more investments. And then we also engage in lobbying efforts to provide greater access to healthcare, and that's healthcare across the full spectrum, so including primary care, behavioral health, mental health, substance use, dental, vision, making sure people have access to the medications that they need, whatever those medications may be, because we know that low-income households that are cost burden are often making really difficult choices about whether to spend their money on housing or on medications. And if we can make medications less expensive, then that choice doesn't become quite so difficult. We also engage on legislation related to access to benefits, reducing barriers for people that are trying to use Medicaid as their insurance, helping people get access to the food benefits that they need to survive, like SNAP and WIC, and that's the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. Sorry, so it's also referred to as food stamps. Really, our goal is to reduce barriers for households that are living on the edge, that are cost burden, that help them, prevent them from entering that cycle of homelessness by getting them the resources they need to survive, and then trying to find ways to get more resources and interventions into the system to help people that are experiencing homelessness today get into a long-term stable housing option.
Got it. Okay, so in a perfect world, how would you go about this issue? Again, you have unlimited amount of funds, you have whatever you want. What's your perfect plan?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, we would have affordable housing that is available to everybody that needs it, and the adequate amount of supportive services that folks need to be successful in that housing. We would have a much more expansive and responsive behavioral health, mental health, substance use treatment system that provided people with the services that they need where they need them. And we would have better access to, we would have more healthcare providers available and have better access to the wide variety of healthcare services that folks need. I think, you can't talk about homelessness without talking about, generational poverty. How do we address generational poverty? Well, we try to, get households access to resources and the ability to build wealth. And in some instances, that is best built in America on owning real estate and owning your own home. So how can we move families that have lived in generational poverty into home ownership opportunities? I think that would be really critical. We have to address the systems of racism that have left far too many Black and Native American folks in the cycle of homelessness because they've been excluded from participating in the housing market because of those policies in the past. So we have to be very intentional that we're not implementing policies that continue that racism and exclusion. And in some instances, we even need to target interventions for those populations to correct those exclusionary policies of the past and maybe even provide more opportunity for those households. I think we need to think about what systems we're using to house people, like the criminal legal system, jail and prisons. That's not housing. It's not the place where people recover from whatever may have led to their homelessness. So we need to get people out of those systems, especially when they're non-violent offenders and they are simply in the system because they were experiencing homelessness. We need to provide housing to them. People shouldn't live in mental health institutions if they don't need that daily ongoing care. They can live in housing with the right level of services provided to them. I guess it's mostly just about how do we create better systems of opportunity for those that are living on the margins of society and that have been excluded from successful opportunities to thrive.
Got it. Well, thank you. I guess that I have one last question, which I've been wondering about. I wonder what you think about it. Do you think there's something unfair about how some cities are being portrayed and versus others? Like when you think, I lived in San Francisco, okay, for 2 years. I actually seen the situation there and it is horrible. Like it is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. But some argue that there is an interest to shed a light on San Francisco, and while not shedding a light on other cities. Sorry. So I just wanted to kind of ask, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think this is the fact that a lot of people know San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, and other cities like that, but they don't talk about other cities? Is that because these other cities don't have the same problem, or is it because just people want to focus on those cities more? I just wanted, from your perspective, what you're thinking.
I mean, what I will say about all of those cities is all of those cities that you just mentioned have extremely high cost housing markets. And not only do they have extremely high cost housing markets, one of the reasons why they are high cost housing markets is because they don't have enough affordable housing, and they're not able to catch up and build enough affordable housing. And so it's both a cost issue as well as a supply issue. And so, we know that in cities where, rents are increasing at the rates that they're increasing in Denver, the rates of homelessness always follow that. These are also very desirable places to live. And so we've seen a lot of population growth in a lot of these cities. And oftentimes that population growth is for people that have means and can afford to move. But that does put more pressure on the system. I know that, I guess it was 2015 in Colorado when we first legalized marijuana. There was a lot of questions about, are people moving to Colorado to smoke marijuana? Probably some people. But what was happening a lot is that people were moving to Colorado to work in the marijuana industry, right? Because that was kind of cool and something new and different. And it was very profitable in those early days. But then they couldn't afford to live here. And they could only, couch surf for so long. And so I think that's really the driver, is the high cost housing market. I think every city, every town in the United States of America has people that are experiencing homelessness. They may not always be visible, but there are always people that are having a difficult time making their house payment, whether that's rent or mortgage, having tragic events happen, losing their home, losing a spouse, losing a child, that drives them, into a state of not being able to maintain a home. And sometimes those people access services and look for assistance, and sometimes they lean on friends and family. Well, if you don't have friends and family, where do you go? And I think that, we know that there are people that live in motels. They're paying a nightly rate every single night to live in a motel, when it would be far less expensive for them to be in actual housing where they just had a monthly rate and not a nightly rate. But because we don't have enough housing for folks living at that income level, that's what they're forced to do. But I think every city in the United States has people experiencing homelessness. It's just in some areas it's more visible. But I think that, it's a nationwide issue.
Got it. That's fair. Yeah, it seems like it does really seem like a nationwide issue. And to be honest, looking into that, I haven't seen magic solutions in any of the cities that I looked into, and I'll be happy to be proven otherwise. Like, I would be very happy to be proven otherwise. I think what we can agree on, and obviously we have disagreements on some issues here, but we can agree on is that this is definitely a terrible situation that needs to be addressed. Probably the solutions, or the policies to be implemented, we have differences on that, but I think that we both share the sentiment that this is a tragedy of, honestly, our society, that we let those things happen, and we should just do whatever we can to not do that, not let that happen, not let people live on the streets, and definitely not let people die in such alarming rates. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say? You have the stage.
I don't think so. I think if we had enough affordable housing, I think this problem would be way less visible, and we would see far fewer deaths on the streets. I believe that, no matter what. That's not to say that people aren't also going to die in housing. But the people that are dying in housing are not just people who experienced homelessness once, right? People die in their homes every single day. And housing is not it's not a magic solution, because it takes so long to develop. And I don't also say that every single person's path into homelessness is unique and different. Every single person's path out of homelessness is unique and different. But what they all have in common is they need a home. They deserve a home. And that's what we should be striving for, is a place where everybody has access to the very basic needs, which is, a home and healthcare. And that's what we work to provide.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I enjoy talking to you. Even again, if we disagree, I actually enjoy disagreements too. So thank you so much. And yeah, be in touch.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.